Happy Friday mga Katribu, and welcome to another episode of Kalingang Katribu Legal Diaries. I'm Roy Pelobelio, and today we are fortunate and honored to be joined by Aranas Cruz, Araneta Parker, and Faustino Law Offices Associate Lawyer Attorney Alfred Campañano. Good afternoon, Attorney. Today, in today's episode, pag-uusapan natin yung mga prohibition or dito intervention, pero yung mga prohibited acts ng mga public employees regarding dito sa ating lalo na darating na election this coming 2022. Unahin na natin, alam naman natin lahat ito ay guided under ano ba yung batas na nag-govern dito sa mga conduct ng public employees during the election?
Actually, kung batas na pinag-uusapan natin, then we start with the Constitution, o yung tinatawag natin sa Ligang Batas, na kung saan in Section 2, Paragraph 4 of Article 9B of the Constitution states that no officer or employee in the civil service shall engage directly or indirectly in any electioneering or partisan political campaign. So, yan pa lang, makikita natin that there's already sort of a prohibition already kapag sinasabi mo intervention. So, in the upcoming elections, the general idea here is people in the civil service should not be campaigning or soliciting votes for and against, soliciting votes for a specific candidate, or they should not be, promoting the defeat of a specific candidate. So that's basically the general idea of partisan political campaign or electioneering. Now, in Section 55, Chapter 7 of the Administrative Code, it also reinforces this prohibition, wherein it states that no officer or employee in the civil service, including, so parang talagang clarify pa in the ating code, including the armed forces of the Philippines, shall engage directly or indirectly in any partisan political activity, except, of course, to vote for themselves, to vote during the said elections. I think it goes without saying that the armed forces of the Philippines, or in this case, are in the same vein, your police officers or special forces or paramilitary groups of the same nature. It goes without saying, it should already be understood, that they should not engage in partisan political activity because of the nature of the institution itself. That they're basically civil servants, and they are armed and highly trained civil servants. So the idea here is the partisan colors or partisan issues should not reach this part of government. Of course, among others, is for security reasons.
Of course.
Because obviously, we have the Omnibus Election Code in Section 261 of the said code, na kung saan, paulit-ulit na sinasabi, no officer or employee in the civil service shall engage directly or indirectly in electioneering or partisan political campaign.
Okay. So that's clear. That's expressly provided for under Section 261 of BP 881 or ang ating Omnibus Election Code. Malinaw po yan, Attorney. Pero if I'm a government employee, am I really prohibited, practically prohibited from supporting any candidate I want?
Sir Roy, the interesting thing about that question is the word support is quite vague.
Uh-huh.
No, in a sense that there are loopholes to that prohibition. Because if you say support, there are a lot of ways for you to express your support
Of course.
for a specific candidate. Obviously, one of which is yung sinabi natin kanina, of course, as public officers or government employees, we're allowed to vote. But in the absence of the right to vote, then are there other ways for a government employee to support their candidate? The answer is, strictly speaking, none. Because again, as civil servants, you should already be apolitical, meaning wala ka ng pinapanigan, wala ka ng kulay, so to speak, na pinag-uusapan dito. However, you have to balance that with the freedom of expression of your government employees, because it does not mean that you have become a public servant na wala ka ng freedom of speech or you're already stripped off of certain freedoms, no? So, in fact, in the Omnibus Election Code, meron tayong mga qualifications na sinasabi niya na kung saan hindi siya matitreat as partisan political activity.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Even if it appears to be a partisan political activity. So, as mentioned in the said law, one of which is, kung nag-uusap lang naman kayo, as a public employee, you're allowed to express support in the platforms of a specific person. You're allowed to mention a person in a specific issue and why you trust that person. Diba? So para kung titignan mo dyan, those kinds of expressions are allowed. No? And somehow, it may be categorized as indirect partisan political activity, but the Omnibus Election Code allows that. Because that's part of your freedom of speech, obviously, as a citizen of the state.
Ayun. So that means the Omnibus Election Code also provides for space where a citizen can really exercise his fundamental right, katulad ng freedom of speech and expression.
Yeah, actually, sir, if I may, kung titignan mo nga yung qualification na yan under the Omnibus Election Code, and even in the Administrative Code of the Philippines, na touching on intervention of government employees during the election period, one might even conclude na although sinasabi na directly or indirectly, there are other indirect ways of engaging in partisan political campaigns na makakalusot sa standard na yan. Because again, the idea of freedom of expression. Kasi kung i-check mo yung mga enumerations in the Omnibus Election Code, na kung saan what are the examples. Although syempre examples lang naman, no? What are the examples of engaging in partisan political activity that is prohibited, no? But for public employees, then yan yung mga pag-form ng organization for the purpose of soliciting votes or for the purposes of making sure that other people will not vote. Diba? Will not vote for a specific person. Or yung parang gumagawa ka ng mga assembly or caucuses, meetings and what have you, to, again, for the purpose of soliciting votes or undertaking the propaganda or campaign of a specific candidate or against a candidate.
Ayun.
So kung i-check mo yung enumeration na yan, although of course, examples lang naman siya lahat, kasi sinasabi nga ng
Nabanggit mo yung examples. Alright, so, alam natin, marami, sabi natin, you should not do anything that would explicitly show your support or you are promoting the candidacy of a certain candidate or para to lessen the chances yung mga kalaban niya, para naman hindi maiboto yung kalaban niya. So, can you give us other examples kung ano pa ito? Halimbawa, pwede ba akong, let's say I'm a government employee, nag-display ako ng poster ng kandidato sa aking bahay. Is that a prohibited activity?
To me, Sir Ron, I think it should fall under the concept of the freedom of expression. Because again, it's akin to an expression of your support. Because it does not mean na, because the idea here is is the action soliciting votes or developing a propaganda against a specific candidate. Parang iyan yung standard talaga eh. So if for example ako isang public officer and then nagpaskil ako sa bahay ko in my private capacity, I am a supporter for example of Bato. Then ang idea niyan is the idea here is that's just an expression on my part that I support this person. So parang ang idea din is public employees or government officials are allowed to have an image that they are allowed, to publicly say their sentiments for support for a specific candidate. But there's a thin line, para yan yung medyo mahirap dyan eh. But there's a thin line between just expressing your support and promoting or campaigning for this person.
Okay, attorney.
So parang the standard here is, are you soliciting votes?
Yes.
For that person, or are you merely expressing your support?
So, attorney, let me clarify this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. If I put a poster of a candidate in my house and I'm a government employee, that's still allowed under our laws, di ba? But it's one thing kung mamimigay ako ng mga poster ng candidate sa ibang tao.
Yes. Kasi yun, the act lang you're distributing pamphlets or campaign literature, that's already you aiding the campaign of that person to solicit support for that person. There's a difference, di ba? Parang kasi madali lang, in a way, yung pagpaskil, di ba? Yan yung sinasabi ko na gray areas eh. Yung pagpaskil mo ng poster, for example, in your house, na for example, you are going to vote for Lenny or going to vote for Bongbong, no? All of these examples, parang pwede kasi siya ma-argue na I'm just expressing my support under my idea of freedom of expression.
All right.
But your example is you're distributing pamphlets already, then you're basically assisting the campaign. You're actually engaging in electioneering
Yun.
to solicit for a vote. So in that sense, that's not allowed.
Okay, so that's clear. If you're actively soliciting vote in favor of a certain candidate, that falls under the prohibited activities not sanctioned by under our laws. All right. So let me just clarify para lang po malinaw. Who are covered by this prohibition? Sino-sino mga government officials ito? Lahat ba ng public employee covered lahat nito?
No. Pag mga public employee, you're referring to yung mga tinatawag na political offices are not covered. So parang the general rule is all government employees, no, except yung mga political offices and the barangay officials. Important yung end na yun because that's the rule is, so basically yung mga government employees that are not allowed to engage in electioneering or partisan political activities, they are the individuals who are considered non-partisan yung kanilang position. So yun yung mga, for example, political offices such as were defined by the Supreme Court as those elective public officials and the barangay official. Because under our laws, the barangay officials are elected public officials, that's true. So it's a political office in that sense. But the barangay officials are, by the nature of the barangay, is non-partisan. So they are covered by the prohibition, even if they are elected officials.
So that means yung mga barangay officials are not allowed to solicit votes for a certain candidate or to dissuade people from voting in favor of another candidate. Is that that how you put it?
Yes, exactly. And of course, ang mga taong pwede lang are basically yung mga elected public officials mo. Except, as I mentioned, stated otherwise, are the barangay officials.
Okay, this is getting interesting. But attorney, stand by. We will just have some reminders for our viewers and we will go back to you after this.
Botomoto Halalan 2022, the Daily Tribune special coverage.
kasama sa programang Gising Na, Roy Pelevelo, Comfy Manalo, Atty. Lia Badillo Crisostomo, Vernon Velasco, Kim Sancha at Jerk Balagtas. Abangan ang programang Gising Na mula alas 8 hanggang alas 9 ng umaga sa Facebook page ng Daily Tribune.
Ilabas ng mainit na kape at samahan kami sa inyong pag-almusal, mga katribo.
Sama-sama natin alamin ang mga natatagong istorya sa mga latest na kaganapan sa loob at labas ng bansa.
Simulan natin ang bawat umaga with good vibes sa mga informative and recreational segments ng aming programa.
Maaari niyo rin ibahagi sa amin ang inyong opinion via Daily Tribune Facebook page at Tribune Now sa YouTube.
Makichika na rin sa latest showbiz happenings, mga katribo.
Kaya naman, magkita-kita po tayo mula Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 8 hanggang alas 9 ng umaga at magsama-sama po tayo sa
Gising Na!
Botomoto Halalan 2022, the Daily Tribune special coverage.
Mga katribo, we're back here at Legal Diaries with our esteemed guest, Atty. Alfred Campañano. Attorney, are still there? Yan, salamat po sa inyong tiyaga na samahan kami ngayong hapon na to. Our discussion kanina is getting interested because we're talking about the officials who are covered by the prohibition, and you were talking about the elected officials. Na hindi covered, maliban doon sa barangay captain na sinasabi ninyo, dapat apolitical, right? Is that correct? Okay. Now, who are not covered, maliban po doon sa mga elective officials, meron pa ba, halimbawa, government employee ako, I'm not an elected official, meron ba mga government employees who are covered by this prohibition? For example, I'm a staff of a senator who's running for re-election. Am I covered by the prohibition?
In that, yan ang understanding, if I recall correctly, is hindi ka covered because you're still, parang may clout ka pa din kahit papano because you're still under that political office. But the rule here is, unless that position is not a political office, meaning it's not a public, it's not an elected public office, then the rule here is, you're covered by this prohibition. So, yung appointive, yung mga na-hire lang for na-hire sa mga local government units, etc.
So, yung mga contractual, halimbawa, yung mga contractual, are they covered by the prohibition? Or dapat regular employee ka ng government, nandun ka sa plantilla position, to be covered by this prohibition?
I think my submission there is you have to be a member of the plantilla. Because kung contractor ka, you're not exactly an employee in the legal sense. You're merely you're para kang external consultant or an independent contractor. That. So walang employer-employee relationship. It just so happened that for a specific task, you're being engaged by the government to provide certain services for the government.
So in that case, you are free to engage in campaign or promote a candidate of your choice if you fall under this category.
Yes.
All right. So, para lang malinaw, just to clarify, what is prohibited under the term election campaign or partisan political activities? Can you give us examples of these activities that are prohibited?
I think this is the one that I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
No? Yung pag-form ng organizations, associations, clubs, committees for the purpose of soliciting votes or undertaking campaign or propaganda for or against a candidate, you holding political caucuses, conferences, rallies, parades, or any assembly, again, for the purpose of soliciting or soliciting votes or for undertaking any campaign for or against a candidate. Then yan yung nabigay niyo po example kanina, Sir Roy.
Yes.
Which is yung pagbigay mo ng pamphlet, pag-distribute mo ng mga parang pamphlet, flyers, etc. I think baka nga pwede din pumasok dito yung pag-share mo sa FB because that's basically a form of publication in itself, no? And any other forms of solicitation of votes or pledges of support.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. Kasi in this age of social media, these are not contemplated specifically under the election code. Nung gawin to, wala pang social media eh. For instance, let's say I'm a government employee, I'm a vlogger. And in my vlog, I promote a certain candidate. Am I liable for electioneering or violation of the election code?
I think my submission there is yes, because again, the enumerations, no, in the Omnibus Election Code is not an exclusive list. That is basically a list of examples only. So whatever, as long as from that vlog, the idea here is you are engaging in propaganda for or against a candidate, or you're soliciting support or votes for a specific candidate, then that arguably is a form of partisan political activity.
Ayun. So, what you're saying is that any activity that you do, if you're a government employee, that falls under the nature of these activities under the enumeration, whether or not it is explicitly provided for, that is also prohibited.
Yes.
Ayun. Para lang malinaw sa ating mga katribo, what are the prohibited activities? Okay. But, okay, there are prohibited activities. There are things you can do.
Sir, wait. Since nandun tayo sa social media, no?
Yes.
Iba ang pag-share ng post as opposed to simply liking a post.
Yes.
So, yun. Baka yun. If you has a question earlier, how do you express support? Like their page.
Yeah.
Like their page, do not share their page. Parang ganyan yung idea.
So that's the general guideline para makaiwas ka sa possible complications. Sabi nga, sa FB sasabihin, your life could become complicated if you do these things. All right. So, merong prohibited activities. We're talking about prohibited activities and the allowable activities of government employees when it comes to elections. Okay. Yung mga kandidato na nag-file, candidates who filed their certificate of candidacies, meron tayong tinatawag na period ng election. At ngayon sinasabi there's no prohibition do sa premature campaigning or dahil may ruling na ng Supreme Court dyan. So,
yes.
Meron din bang similar deadline or range of time where this prohibition sets in? Or simply pagpasok na ng kailan mag-a-apply itong mga prohibitions na to?
Ganito kasi siya, no? In the case, this is the one that you're referring, is Panera versus Comelec and Andanar in 2009. Ang pinaka-issue kasi dyan, if I recall correctly, is the definition of what is a candidate. So, I think, doon sa sinasabi natin ng premature campaigning, there's no, parang the effect, this is what I was explaining a while ago din, no, dun sa an office mate of mine, na kung saan, the idea of premature political campaigning is prior to the campaign period allowed by law, kasi pinifix yan, di ba? If I'm not mistaken, I think sa February 2022 ang start ng campaign period.
Yes.
Ngayon, supposedly, the definition of premature campaigning is you're not allowed to campaign for or against a candidate prior to the election period. That's the idea there.
Yes.
So, for example, if February 2022 pa ang ang campaign period allowed by law, then we should not be seeing flyers being distributed. We should not be seeing any advertisements soliciting votes or support for a person, diba? For a candidate. But doon kasi, ang nangyari kasi sa Supreme Court case na yan is because of the amendment introduced by nung inintroduce natin yung automated elections.
Yes.
Na kung saan nagkaroon ng phraseology sa law na kung saan ang sinasabi niya is the period for filing, diba, which is yung sa filing of the candidacy.
Yes, which occurred last
Diba?
October 8.
Kasi I think October 8 ata yung last period,
Yes,
no?
yes, yes.
Ideally, or in layman, ang tingin dapat natin dyan is candidate na sila.
Yes.
Kasi nag-file na sila ng certificate of candidacy. However, diba, apparently, because of the amendments introduced by Republic Act 8436 and 9369 as to how it defines a candidate, it would appear that a person who files a certificate, his certificate of candidacy, is only considered as a candidate under legal perspective at the start of the campaign period.
Mm-hmm.
So ano yung repercussion niyan? As you mentioned, it would appear that wala ng concept of premature campaigning.
Yes.
And in fact, yung monitoring of expenses, nagsisimula yan from the time na nag-start ang campaign period up to, well, hanggang sa matapos ang campaign period. So I think, in the same vein, that the prohibition imposed on public officials, public employees, na sinasabi natin, also follows that same logic.
Yo.
Na kung saan, you're only prohibited from campaigning for or against a specific candidate during the campaign period. Because, supposedly, because of the ruling in that Supreme Court case, even if I, for example, am a public employee, say nagtatrabaho ako sa DSWD, at this moment, in time, alam ko na kung sino yung mga nag-file ng certificate of candidacy.
Yes.
Si Lenny, si Lacson, Soto, sino pa ba? Bato. Pacquiao.
Oh.
Diba?
Si Isko
At this
and
moment, I can
Marcos,
actually
para
say-
lang just to be fair, let's mention them all. All right.
Sige.
Go ahead.
Sabihan mo nila ako if I miss someone.
No
For
problem.
presidency, I think it's Bongbong, Marcos, Ping Lacson, Lenny, Robredo,
Bato.
De La Rosa,
Yes. Isko Moreno.
Isko Moreno, and Manny Pacquiao.
Yes.
Did I forget anyone?
No.
So, for example, at this time, even if I am a public employee, I can actually say vote for Lenny, vote for Bongbong, vote for yon. So, sino ka man doon sa enumeration ko kanina.
Right.
Vote for Lacson, ganyan. Because ultimately, hindi pa talaga sila candidate.
They are not considered candidate
They're
under
not
the legal
yet
fiction.
considered candidate under the law.
Yes.
No? Because the campaign period has not yet commenced.
Yeah.
So, kung titignan mo yung mga activities that you are not allowed to do as a government employee, then kung titignan mo dyan is you're supposedly any activity soliciting votes for a candidate, yan yung word for a candidate, or engaging in propaganda for or against, again, a candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the ruling in the Supreme Court, it would appear, it would appear, not mali yung word there. Because of the ruling of the Supreme Court in Peñera versus Comelec and Andanar, 2009 case, it would appear na naman.
Go ahead.
The conclusion there is they are only considered as a candidate at the start of the campaign period. So at this moment, they are not really candidates for the position. At this moment, they are only considered as candidates beginning the campaign period. So, your engagement in electioneering or partisan political activities, which is basically couched or premised on soliciting or campaigning for or against a specific candidate, you're not really engaging or intervening yet because wala pang candidate, legally speaking.
All right. So just to sum up what you have been patiently explaining to us, the prohibition against government officials from engaging in partisan political activities commences only during the start of the campaign period. All right? Is that
Yes.
is that correct, attorney?
Nakakatuwa lang yung ruling na yan eh. Kasi
Oo.
even when I was a law student, nagulat din ako na, kaya naman pala.
Alright. Alright. So, isang tanong na lang ulit. Ano bang penalty for engaging in partisan political activities sa mga government officials?
Well, meron siya dyan yung disqualification niya from office, whether it's temporary or perpetual. And then, of course, you have imprisonment of at least 1 year, but not more than 6 years. And the same is not probationable.
All right. Thank you, attorney. We will pause for some reminders, but we will be back.
Boto mo to Halalan 2022, the Daily Tribune special coverage. Boto mo to Halalan 2022, the Daily Tribune special coverage.
We're back here at Legal Diaries. At sa ating mga Katribunal segment, na yung mga sumusubaybay sa ating Katribunal segment, may natuklasan po kami, mga Katribo. Did you know that a campaign can be seen as an organized, purposeful effort to create change? The campaign period in the Philippines lasts 90 days for presidential and vice presidential election. 45 days for election of members of the Batas Pambansa or Congress and local elections, and 15 days for barangay elections. Yeah, that's our tribunal for today. Attorney Alfred, you want to add anything to that? Your thought on particularly dito sa election period, and probably yung dapat na bang ma-amend yung rules sa premature campaigning?
I think I'll trust the decision of the Supreme Court, in the reasoning behind it. But I think it's up to the policymakers.
Yes.
If there's really an intention to prohibit or to combat premature campaigning, then I think different laws, another law should be crafted to address this. Because the Supreme Court basically just ruled it that way,
Yes.
because yun yung wording ng law.
Yes.
But I think ang mas gusto ko lang din bigyan ng emphasis, before we end this program, is the definition that we found about campaigning. I think in one of the segments then previously on Legal Diaries, the topic was also in election as well. And I think kung mapapansin nyo, ganun ka generic or ganun ka broad, not generic, ganun ka broad ang definition ng campaigning. Because again, kung titignan mo, the Omnibus Election Code, understandably, is the first thing that comes to mind to the general public if they hear the election code is halalan.
Mm-hmm.
Diba, yan na yung presidency, etc. But again, there are also other aspects of election that does not involve electing a public official, which is one of which is yung pagpasa mo ng batas. Kung gusto, actually, the people can pass their own laws if they want to through the mechanisms provided for under the Constitution. If they want to amend the Constitution, they may do so by, again, campaigning for it and then securing the number of votes. So kaya tama yung definition ng tribunes. Did you know? Because campaigning is basically indeed an act to effect change.
Ayun, well said, Attorney Alfred. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure having you, and I hope we hope you will give us some more of your time kung kinakailangan po.
Will do po, will.
Ayan, maraming salamat, Attorney Alfred Campañano. Watch Kalingang Katribu Legal Diaries live every Friday at 3:30 p.m. on Daily Tribune's official Facebook page and on Tribune Now on YouTube for the replay of the latest episode. Muli, I'm Roy Pilobello. See you next Friday, mga katribo. Magandang hapon.